As the first light of dawn creeps over the horizon, the small rural cemetery outside Willow Creek stirs to life in a symphony of morning sounds. Birds chirp in the gnarled branches of old oaks, and a gentle breeze whispers through the grass. But amidst this tranquil dawn chorus, one figure remains motionless, a stark contrast to the gentle sway of nature. A small, scruffy pup, with fur matted from nights spent under the stars, stands guard by a fresh grave marked by a simple military headstone. The pup's presence is a silent vigil, its eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that belies its small stature. Every so often, it shifts, its movements deliberate and solemn, as if performing a ritual understood only by itself. The grave, distinguished from others by its recent adornments and the flag that flutters softly above it, belongs to Michael, a young soldier from Willow Creek, whose life was cut tragically short in a distant conflict. The pup, known to the few who have noticed it as Ranger, has been here since the day Michael was laid to rest, never straying far from the hallowed ground. As the cemetery gates creak open, an early visitor arrives, a man named Alex, a young journalist and a recent returnee to Willow Creek, seeking solace in the stories of his hometown. His eyes are immediately drawn to the unusual sight of the lone pup. Curiosity piqued, Alex approaches slowly, his footsteps careful not to startle the vigilant guardian. "Hey there, little one. What are you doing all alone out here?" Alex whispers, his voice a mix of concern and wonder. The pup looks up, its gaze meeting Alex's, eyes filled with an unspoken sadness that tugs at the heartstrings. For a moment, Alex sees a flicker of recognition, or perhaps it's just his imagination, fueled by the emotional weight of the scene before him. As Alex kneels beside the pup, he notices a small wildflower placed meticulously at the base of the headstone, a poignant symbol of remembrance and devotion. Moved by this display of loyalty, Alex pulls out his notebook, the journalist within sensing a story that needs to be told, one of unwavering fidelity that transcends even the boundaries of life and death. "Who were you to him, huh? What's your story?" Alex muses aloud, not expecting an answer but feeling a deep need to uncover the bond that ties this small, loyal creature to the fallen soldier. This early morning encounter marks the beginning of Alex's journey into the heart of Willow Creek's tales of loyalty, sacrifice, and community, a journey that would reveal not just the story of a soldier and his dog, but also rekindle a town's spirit, long dampened by loss and sorrow. As the sun rises higher, casting light over the headstones, Alex sits back, the pup beside him, both watching the day awaken, bound by a newfound connection and a shared vigil. Willow Creek was the kind of town where the past never truly faded. It clung to the streets, whispered through the trees, and settled into the hearts of its people like an old familiar song. With a population small enough that no face was forgotten, yet large enough that not every secret was known, it stood as a testament to simpler times. In the town square, the American flag rippled against the morning sky, unfurling proudly with each gust of wind. The clock tower, a relic of generations past, chimed with a steady rhythm, marking the passage of time in a place where life moved at its own unhurried pace. Red brick storefronts lined Main Street, their windows filled with homemade crafts, fresh produce, and framed photographs of soldiers who had once called this place home. The townspeople, bound by unspoken traditions, gathered at the cafe in the mornings, sipping coffee and swapping stories that blended truth with nostalgia. Veterans sat beneath the old oak near the courthouse, their voices low, their eyes distant. Children rode their bikes past the white picket fences, their laughter echoing off the cobblestone streets. And beyond it all, just at the town's edge, stood the cemetery, silent, solemn, and steadfast. It was here that a lone pup had taken residence, an unspoken guardian of a single grave. Each morning, as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the sky, the pup stirred from his slumber beneath the towering willow. He would stretch, shake off the night's chill, and make his way toward the gravestone, the same one he had watched over since the day he arrived. His golden brown fur, once sleek, was now dusted with the wear of time. His eyes, dark and knowing, held a quiet devotion. Visitors to the cemetery often found him there, his small form curled against the headstone, his ears flicking at the sound of footsteps. Some left flowers, some lingered in quiet reflection, and some, moved by the sight of the unwavering pup, offered scraps of food. The kind-hearted ones left bowls of water near the gate, and though he never begged, he accepted these small kindnesses with a quiet grace. Through the day, he would patrol the cemetery, a silent sentinel against the unseen. He never wandered far, never strayed beyond the rusted iron gates. Birds perched near him, as if sensing the gentleness in his spirit. The wind would rustle through the leaves, carrying whispers of names long forgotten, yet the pup remained, loyal, patient, waiting. At dusk, when the sky bled into shades of crimson and gold, he would return to his place beside the grave, curling into the hollow he had long since claimed as his own. His watch never ended, only paused with the coming of night. Alex Carter was no stranger to grief. A journalist by trade, a wanderer by nature, he had spent the last few years chasing stories that never quite filled the void left in his heart. Loss had shaped him, molded him into someone who sought meaning in the unspoken and solace in the stories left behind. He arrived in Willow Creek on assignment, his notepad filled with questions, his camera capturing fragments of a town frozen in time. What he hadn't expected to find was a mystery wrapped in fur and unwavering loyalty. The first time he saw the pup, he was struck by the stillness, the quiet reverence in its posture. He had written about war, about sacrifice, about the ones who never made it home, but here was a devotion he had never seen before. "What's his story?" he asked the caretaker, a man with tired eyes and hands worn from years of tending to the dead. The old man shrugged. "No one really knows. He showed up one day and never left. Some say he belonged to the soldier buried there. Others think he's just a stray." He glanced at the pup. "But I think he's waiting." Alex felt the weight of those words settle deep in his chest. He had spent so much time chasing the extraordinary that he almost overlooked the simple truth in front of him. There was a story here, one worth telling. He pulled out his notepad, jotting down details, watching as the pup lifted his head, ears twitching as if sensing his gaze. Maybe, just maybe, this was the story he had been meant to find. As Alex began his search for answers, he found the town split between those who cared and those who dismissed the pup as just another stray. At the cafe, an elderly woman with silver curls and kind eyes set down her coffee cup. "I bring him food sometimes," she admitted. "He never begs, just sits there, quiet as ever." "Breaks my heart," a younger man scoffed. "It's just a dog, nothing special." The debate continued. Some believed the pup's loyalty was a testament to something greater, a connection beyond life and death. Others dismissed it as coincidence, a stray with nowhere else to go. Alex listened to every word, piecing together the fragments of a story that was both deeply personal and universally understood. He saw the way some visitors left offerings while others ignored the small guardian completely. He watched as the children of the town approached with cautious curiosity and how the veterans lingered just a little longer, their eyes heavy with unspoken recognition. Whatever the truth, the pup had become more than just an animal. He was a symbol, a silent reminder of a past that refused to be forgotten. Late one evening, as the town settled into its quiet rhythm, Alex sat beneath the willow tree, the pup resting a few feet away. He ran a hand over the worn letters carved into the headstone, tracing the name of a soldier whose story had yet to be told. Through whispered accounts and fading records, Alex had begun to uncover hints of the man buried here, a soldier who had left for war and never returned the same. A man who, by all accounts, had once owned a dog much like this one. The pieces were falling into place, the lines between past and present beginning to blur. As the wind carried the distant hum of the town's nighttime lull, Alex glanced at the pup. "Were you his?" he asked softly. The pup did not answer, but in the flicker of its dark eyes, in the way it pressed against the grave as if offering comfort to the one beneath, Alex felt he already knew. The story wasn't just about a soldier. It was about love, about loyalty, about the unbreakable bond between man and beast. And as Alex turned his gaze to the night sky, he knew his search wasn't over. It was just beginning. Alex sat hunched over a stack of yellowed newspapers in the dimly lit corner of the Willow Creek library. The scent of aged paper and dust filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of the overhead light. His fingers traced the fragile edges of the pages as he scanned each line, searching for fragments of a life that had once been. The name Michael Carter had surfaced in whispered conversations around town, spoken with a mix of reverence and sorrow. A soldier, a hero. Yet his story had faded into the background like ink bleeding into old parchment. Through interviews with veterans at the Pori local diner, Alex learned that Michael had been more than just a name etched into stone. He had been a man of quiet strength, the kind who carried the weight of war on his shoulders, but found solace in the company of animals. A rescuer of strays, a believer in second chances. Michael had a way with dogs, an elderly veteran had told him, his voice rough with age. He'd find the ones no one else wanted, the broken ones, and make them whole again. The words clung to Alex's mind as he flipped through brittle news articles. Then, finally, he found it. A faded clipping from over a decade ago. Local soldier returns, continues mission to save rescue dogs. The article detailed how Michael had come home from deployment and, despite his own struggles, dedicated himself to rehabilitating abandoned dogs. The accompanying photo was grainy, but the image was unmistakable. A tall man with kind eyes, kneeling beside a litter of rescued pups. Alex's heart clenched. Could it be? He quickly scanned the article for names, details, anything. Then he found it. Michael and his family took in a litter of strays rescued from a storm. One pup in particular seemed attached to him, a golden brown mix with dark, soulful eyes. He named him Bailey. Bailey. Alex sat back, exhaling sharply as realization settled over him. The pup at the cemetery wasn't just any stray, he was Michael's. The discovery filled Alex with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. He needed to know more. Why Bailey had ended up alone, guarding Michael's grave like a silent sentinel. His search led him to the town's outskirts, where an old farmhouse stood at the end of a gravel road. The door creaked open to reveal an elderly woman, her weathered face softening at the sight of him. "You must be the journalist asking about Michael," she said knowingly. Alex nodded. "I found records about his work with rescue dogs. I think I found one of them. Bailey." The woman, Sarah Carter, Michael's mother, stilled, her breath catching. She stepped aside, motioning for Alex to enter. As they sat in her living room, surrounded by framed photographs and the lingering echoes of a life long past, she told him the truth. "Michael loved that dog," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They were inseparable. After everything he'd seen overseas, Bailey was his peace, his constant." Alex listened intently, his hands clasped together. "But when Michael died..." She paused, swallowing back the grief. "Bailey was lost. We tried to keep him, but he wouldn't stay. He'd run off searching. And one day, he just never came back." Alex felt the weight of the story settle deep in his chest. Bailey hadn't been abandoned. He had chosen to leave, to return to the only place that still held a piece of Michael. "He found his way back to him," Alex murmured. Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "He did." Determined to uncover more, Alex returned to the library, combing through personal records and archives. He sifted through old military files, newspaper, clippings, anything that could piece together Michael's past. Then, buried in a box of forgotten belongings donated years ago, he found it. An old Polaroid, edges curled from time, the colors slightly faded. In it, Michael sat on the front porch of the farmhouse, laughing as Bailey, a tiny pup at the time, climbed onto his lap, licking his face. Alex's fingers trembled as he held the photo. The connection between them was unmistakable. Bailey hadn't just lost an owner. He had lost his world. The air in the library felt heavier, thick with the weight of memories long buried. Alex ran his thumb over the image, as if hoping to pull something from the past into the present. He had come to Willow Creek to tell a story. But this wasn't just a story. It was a testament to love, to loyalty, to a bond that not even death could sever. The final revelation came unexpectedly, delivered in the form of a police report tucked away in the town's records office. Alex sat frozen as he read the details. The accident had happened on a rainy evening. Michael's family had been driving home when their car lost control on the winding back road. It overturned. Michael's parents survived, but he didn't. Alex's breath hitched. His fingers tightened around the paper. Then, buried in the last few lines, was something that sent a shiver down his spine. One survivor was found at the scene, a dog. A golden brown pup, thrown from the vehicle but miraculously alive. Dazed, but uninjured. Bailey. Alex swallowed hard. The pup had been there, he had lived through it, had seen it all. And after the dust had settled, after the world had moved on, he had done the only thing he knew how to do. He had gone back to the only place that still felt like home. Back to Michael. Tears blurred Alex's vision as he set the report down. Bailey's story wasn't just one of loyalty, it was one of survival, of enduring pain and loss, yet never abandoning the one he loved. He had spent years searching for Michael in the only way he knew how, and in the end, he had never truly left his side. Alex closed his notebook, his heart aching with the weight of it all. Some stories were meant to be told. This was one of them. The storm had been brewing long before Alex arrived in Willow Creek. It started as whispers in town meetings, hushed discussions in the cafe, and official letters mailed to the residents, letters stamped with the seal of progress, wrapped in the language of economic growth. The town cemetery, with its aging headstones and unmarked graves, was in the way. A new commercial district was planned. The town needed expansion, they said. The proposal was simple: relocate the graves, repurpose the land. To the developers, it was just paperwork. To the townspeople, it was something else entirely. At the heart of it all stood Alex, the outsider who had become an unlikely advocate. He had come searching for a story, but what he found was something much deeper. He found them. The graves weren't just names carved in stone, they were history. They were the foundation of Willow Creek, the echoes of lives lived and lost, the silent witnesses to the town's legacy. And among them was Michael's and Bailey. The pup had guarded the grave for years, a living monument to loyalty and love. To move the cemetery would be to erase that, to sever the last tie between the past and present. But progress had no patience for sentiment. The town hall was packed. Rows of metal chairs filled the small space, the air thick with tension. At the front, council members sat behind a long wooden table, stacks of reports and city plans before them. Alex stood in the center, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "This isn't just a patch of land," he said, scanning the room. "It's our past. It's our people. You can't just move history because it's inconvenient." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but not everyone was convinced. "We understand the sentiment, Mr. Carter," one of the council members responded, adjusting his glasses, "but the town is growing. We need infrastructure, businesses." Alex shook his head. "At what cost?" He held up the photograph he had found, the one of Michael and Bailey. "These people lived here, fought for this country, died here, and now you're willing to uproot their final resting place for a shopping plaza?" Silence. In the back of the room, Sarah Carter, Michael's mother, wiped at her eyes. Others, veterans, families who had visited the cemetery for generations, nodded, their faces etched with quiet determination. "If we let this happen," Alex continued, his voice thick with emotion, "what does that say about us? About what we value?" Bailey, as if sensing the weight of the moment, lay at Alex's feet, his presence a reminder of what was truly at stake. That night, the town was no longer just divided between those who supported the development and those who opposed. A movement had begun, and Alex was at its heart. The debate raged on for weeks. Some saw the cemetery as sacred ground, a place that deserved respect and protection. Others saw it as an obstacle, a roadblock to modernizing the town. The local newspaper published articles on both sides. Business owners spoke in favor of new opportunities. Families with buried loved ones fought to keep the graves undisturbed. Lines were drawn. At the general store, an argument broke out between two men. One, a lifelong resident. The other, a businessman eager for development. "Willow Creek is dying," the businessman snapped. "We need this." The older man shook his head. "This town ain't dying, but if we forget where we came from, what does that make us?" Even longtime friends found themselves at odds, their conversations tense with the weight of what was being decided. Meanwhile, Alex worked tirelessly. He gathered signatures, met with officials, wrote articles detailing the personal stories of those buried in the cemetery. He spoke to anyone who would listen, and still, the council remained unmoved. The development was set for approval, until the unlikeliest of voices stepped forward. John Reynolds had spent his life in Willow Creek. He had served in the military, lost friends to war, and buried his father in that very cemetery. And now, as head of the development board, the final decision rested in his hands. To the town, he was the man pushing for change, the man who would sign away their past for the future. But no one knew how much it weighed on him. He sat in his office. Late at night, the documents before him, the ink on the approval form waiting for his signature. His fingers hovered over the pen. In his mind, he saw his father's grave, the way he had knelt before it as a boy, promising to make him proud. He saw Michael Carter's name on a headstone, the town's fallen hero. And then, he thought of the pup. He had driven past the cemetery countless times, always seeing that small figure curled against the grave, always waiting, always watching. Bailey didn't care about progress. He didn't care about new roads or storefronts. He cared about what was left behind. With a heavy sigh, John leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. Some things were worth preserving, and in that moment he knew. The next day, the town hall filled once more, the final vote looming. Tension hung in the air as John took his seat, looking out over the crowd. He met Alex's gaze, then Sarah Carter's, then the quiet, knowing eyes of the pup that sat by the door, waiting. Taking a deep breath, John picked up the microphone. "I've spent my life believing that progress is what keeps a town alive," he began, his voice steady. "But I've come to realize that remembering where we came from, that's just as important." A murmur spread through the room. John exhaled slowly. Then, with quiet conviction, he looked out at the people of Willow Creek and said the words that would change everything. "The development will move forward." A hush fell over the crowd, but before disappointment could settle, he continued, "But not here, not on this land. The cemetery will remain untouched." The room erupted. Some cheered, some protested, but for those who had fought to protect the past, relief washed over them like the breaking dawn. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and at his feet, Bailey lay down, his watch unbroken, his duty fulfilled. The town hall buzzed with tension, the air thick with anticipation. The small space was packed. Locals filled every seat, others stood against the walls. Arms crossed, faces set in determination. The weight of history, of loss, of love, hung heavy in the room. This was the night where words would decide whether the past would remain or be paved over in the name of progress. At the front, the council members sat behind their long wooden table, their faces carefully neutral, though some shifted uncomfortably. In the center of it all was John Reynolds, the man who held the deciding vote, his brow furrowed with the burden of the choice before him. Alex stood near the speaker's podium, heart pounding in his chest. He had spent days preparing for this, moment, but nothing could prepare him for the energy in the room, the clash of those fighting for history and those pushing for change. From the back, a voice rang out. "We need jobs. We need growth. The cemetery's been here forever. It's time for something new." Murmurs of agreement rippled through one side of the room. Then another voice. "You can't replace the past with a shopping mall. These graves aren't just stone and dirt. They're people. Our people." Shouts, arguments, a heated back and forth that threatened to spiral into chaos. And then, the softest sound, barely audible, cut through the noise. A low whimper, all. Eyes turned toward the door, where Bailey sat, ears perked, watching, waiting. The room fell silent. Alex took a deep breath and stepped forward. Alex's voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was undeniable. "I came to Willow Creek as an outsider," he began, scanning the room. "I came looking for a story, and I found one, but not in the way I expected." He glanced at Bailey, then back at the crowd. "This town has something rare. It has history that breathes through its streets. It has a past that isn't forgotten, and it has a guardian, one that reminds us every single day what loyalty looks like." A hush settled over the room. Even the skeptics leaned in, listening. Bailey has spent years waiting, watching, guarding the grave of a soldier who never came home the same. A soldier who gave everything for this country, for this town. And now, we're deciding if his final resting place is worth keeping? He let the words sink in before continuing. "This isn't just about Michael Carter. It's not just about Bailey. It's about every person buried there. Every name on every stone. They lived here. They loved here. They fought for this town. And we're standing here debating whether their memories are worth preserving?" A few heads lowered, shame creeping into once hardened expressions. "This cemetery is a part of Willow Creek, and if we destroy it, if we move it like it's just an inconvenience, then we lose more than just land. We lose who we are." Silence. Then a single voice. A woman in the front row, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. "He's right." And suddenly the tide began to shift. John Reynolds sat stiffly, his hands folded before him, his mind racing. He had spent years making decisions for this town, weighing costs and benefits, pushing for growth, but never had a decision felt this heavy. His gaze drifted to Bailey. The pup lay at Alex's feet, his dark eyes watching, waiting, loyal, steadfast, just like Michael had been. John swallowed hard. For years, he had buried his grief beneath obligations, convincing himself that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But now, as he sat before his people, as he heard Alex's words echoing in his mind, something inside him cracked. He cleared his throat, and the room turned to him. 30 years ago, he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I lost my brother in the war." A hush fell over the hall. "He never came home," John continued, his fingers tightening into fists. "Not really. His body made it back, but the man we knew, he was gone." He exhaled, shaking his head. "We buried him right here, right in that cemetery." His gaze lifted, sweeping over the faces before him. "I know what progress means. I know what a town needs to survive. But I also know that some things are worth more than money, more than roads, more than buildings." He looked directly at Alex. "Our past matters." He turned to the rest of the council. "I change my vote." Gasps, then murmurs, then outright discussion. John leaned forward, hands pressed against the table. "I vote to preserve the cemetery." A moment passed, then another. Then one by one, the other council members nodded in agreement. Applause erupted, first hesitant, then a wave of relief, of triumph. The town hall transformed from a battleground into a celebration. People clapped, hugged, wiped at their eyes. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Bailey, kneeling beside him. "We did it," he whispered, scratching behind the pup's ear. Bailey simply wagged his tail, curling against Alex's side. John Reynolds stood, looking out over the town he had served for so long. He had spent years believing he was leading them toward a brighter future. And maybe he still was. But now he understood. True progress didn't mean erasing the past, it meant honoring it. And so, on that night, Willow Creek made its choice. The cemetery would remain untouched, a sacred piece of their history. And at its entrance, where the willow trees swayed and the wind carried whispers of the past, Bailey remained, the eternal guardian of a memory that would never be lost. The sun rose over Willow Creek Cemetery, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and crimson. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly turned earth and wildflowers planted along the worn pathways. But today, something felt different. Something felt whole. The cemetery, once under threat, now stood untouched, forever protected by the town's official decree. A historical landmark, a place not just of sorrow, but of remembrance, of honor. The old iron gates had been restored, their rusted edges polished, their hinges no longer groaning under the weight of time. At the entrance, a new plaque had been placed, gleaming under the morning light. Willow Creek Memorial Cemetery, a tribute to those who served and the loyalty that never fades. A crowd had gathered for the unveiling. Families, veterans, children who had once played among the willow trees all stood in quiet reverence. Alex watched from the sidelines, hands tucked into his pockets, a rare smile ghosting his lips. Beside him, Bailey sat, ears perked, tail lightly thumping against the earth. This had been his home for years, his purpose. But now, the weight of duty had eased. A young boy ran forward, placing a single white flower against the stone of a fallen soldier. Others followed. The cemetery was no longer just a resting place. It had become a place of stories, of remembrance, of life. And Bailey, no longer just a guardian, but a symbol, watched it all unfold. The small house sat just beyond the cemetery's edge, its windows glowing warmly against the early evening sky. It wasn't grand, nor particularly new, but to Alex it was enough. Inside, the air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and old books stacked in haphazard piles along the shelves. The walls, once bare, had begun to fill with framed photographs, snapshots of a life Alex never thought he'd build in a place like Willow Creek. Near the door, Bailey lay curled on his own dog bed, not a patch of cold earth, not beside a grave, but in a home. His home. Alex set down his notepad, stretching as he glanced toward the pup. Guess we're stuck with each other now, huh? Bailey lifted his head, his dark eyes holding something knowing, something content. Alex had never planned to stay. He had come searching for a story, for answers, for meaning. What he had found was family. He reached down, scratching behind Bailey's ear. You're not just a stray anymore, buddy. Bailey let out a soft sigh, his tail flicking against the floor. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting. The impact of the cemetery's preservation rippled through Willow Creek like the changing seasons. Where once there had been hesitation, now there was pride. Local businesses started restoring their storefronts, adding touches of history to their displays. The town's historical society, once forgotten, saw a surge of interest. New projects were launched to restore old landmarks, to protect forgotten graves, to care for the town's stray animals. Even Bailey, once seen as just another wandering dog, had become a symbol of something greater. One afternoon, as Alex walked Bailey through the now preserved cemetery, he noticed something remarkable. Near the willow tree where Bailey had once kept his silent vigil, a new shelter had been built. A small sanctuary for stray and rescued animals, built in honor of a soldier who had loved them and a dog who had never forgotten. A sign near the entrance bore a simple yet powerful inscription, Michael Carter Memorial Animal Haven, in honor of unbreakable bonds. Alex knelt beside Bailey, his fingers running through the pup's thick fur. Looks like you started something, huh? Bailey simply leaned into him, his silent way of saying he already knew. It had become a tradition. Each Sunday, Alex and Bailey would walk the familiar path to Michael's grave. Today was no different. The wind whispered through the trees as Alex knelt before the stone, brushing away a stray leaf. "Hey, Michael," he murmured. "Thought we'd check in." Bailey sat beside him, his tail gently swaying, his nose nudging the cool stone as if to say, "I'm still here." Alex swallowed the lump in his throat. "I think you'd like what we did with the place." He chuckled softly. "Your mom still insists I don't eat enough. And Bailey, well, he runs the town now. Not officially, but close enough." Bailey let out a small huff, resting his head against the grave. Alex sighed, his gaze drifting up toward the sky. "I never really believed in fate," he admitted. "But something brought me here. Something made sure Bailey wasn't alone. Maybe that was you." For a long while, there was silence. The kind that wasn't empty, but full. Full of meaning, of understanding, of something that didn't need words. Alex reached out, resting a hand on the stone. "You were never forgotten, Michael. Not by Bailey, not by this town, and not by me." Bailey lifted his head, his ears twitching. Then, slowly, he settled back down. For the first time in years, his watch was restful. Not because he had given up, but because he knew Michael was at peace, and so was he. As the seasons passed, Willow Creek remained, not untouched by time, not frozen in history, but preserved with purpose. The cemetery stood as a reminder, not just of loss, but of love, of sacrifice, of the quiet stories that shaped the town's soul. At its gates, the plaque bore a new addition, a small engraving added beneath its inscription, "In memory of the soldier who loved, and the dog who never left." Alex stood beside it, hands in his pockets, watching as visitors placed flowers at graves, as children ran through the grass, as Bailey sat beside him, his eyes calm. The past hadn't been erased, it had been honored, and for as long as people walked through those gates, for as long as stories were told beneath the willow trees, Michael's name and Bailey's devotion would never be forgotten. Loyalty, after all, never truly fades. It simply waits, patiently, faithfully, until it is remembered